The morning at my son's house began as dreary as the previous 1,095 days. I know that number exactly. That's how many days have passed since I sold my house on Oak Street and moved here, to this spacious but alien mansion in the upscale neighborhood of North Platte. Exactly 3 years of a life I can't call my own. I get out of bed quietly, trying not to squeak the floorboards. I'm 73, but I'm still nimble enough to move almost silently, a skill I've learned here willy-nilly. The front door slams. Param's gone to work. That meant I could go down to the kitchen and make breakfast without seeing Valerie. My room is on the first floor, at the far end of the house. It used to be a guest bedroom, and I always feel like I'm a guest here, and not a welcome one. It's my own fault, though. I'm the one who was persuaded. "Dad, you can't live alone in a house this big," Param had said 3 years ago, sitting in my cozy living room on Oak Street. "It's 6 rooms. What do you need them for? You've been so withdrawn since Mom died. Valerie and I are worried." Valerie sat beside me, her slender fingers with perfect manicures clutching the cup of tea I'd brewed for them. "Mortimer," she was the only one who called me by my full name. "Param and I talked it over and decided you'd be better off with us. We have a big house, the kids adore Grandpa, and I'll be able to keep an eye on your health." I looked at Eleanor's picture on the mantelpiece. My wife had died 5 years ago, taking with her the color and flavor of my life. The house we'd chosen together, where we'd raised our son, really did seem too big now, too empty. "You'll have your own room, complete independence," Param continued to press, "and the money from the sale of the house will be invested somewhere to give you a decent old age. You'll be 71 soon, and it's time to think about the future." Maybe I wouldn't agree if it weren't for the grandkids. Paxton and Lindell, twins who were 14 years old at the time. I rarely saw them after Eleanor died. Valerie always found reasons to cancel visits. The kids are studying for exams. Paxton has a competition. Lindell isn't feeling well. I longed for those kids. And in that moment, in my empty living room, I thought that maybe this was a chance to be there for them in their final years until they fled their parents' nest. Now, 3 years later, I realize I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. The kitchen is quiet. Valerie is usually up late. She's housekeeping, as she calls it, though the housekeeper who comes in does most of the work. I quickly make myself some oatmeal and pour boiling water over a tea bag. 7:30 sharp is the time I used to have breakfast with Eleanor, the habits of an old man that you can't get rid of. "Grandfather?" Lindell's quiet voice makes me wince. "Good morning, kiddo," I reply, though my grandson has already grown half a head taller than me. "Why so early?" Lindell shrugs. He's a carbon copy of his grandmother, the same soft features, the same thoughtful eyes. "Algebra test first period," he says, pouring himself an orange juice. "I thought I'd review the formulas." "Want some help?" I offer. I worked as a financial analyst until I retired, and numbers have always been my friend. Lindell smiles and shakes his head. "No, I can handle it. But can I sit next to you?" He always asked for permission. Valerie had raised her children with an odd mixture of ostentatious deference to their elders and an inner rejection of them. It's worked perfectly with Paxton. He barely speaks to me, just says hello out of politeness. But Lindell, I see something of myself in him, a quiet stubbornness, an unwillingness to conform to the general tone. We eat breakfast in comfortable silence. I remember my breakfast with Eleanor. We were often silent too, but it was the silence of two people who didn't need words to understand each other. "Drinking that cheap tea again, Grandpa?" asked Lindell in a whisper. "I like it," I answered just as quietly. We both know I drink it, not because I like it, but because Valerie has publicly resented my elite habits several times. When I first moved, I brought with me a collection of Chinese oolongs that Eleanor and I had collected over the years. After a few comments from my sister-in-law that some retirees should temper their appetites, I put my teas away in the far drawer of the closet in my room and started drinking what everyone in the house was drinking. I could have told her that I was spending money from my pension on my elite habit, that I cover all my expenses myself, that I invested the money from the sale of the house, as Param advised, and now have a steady income, which I'm in no hurry to share. But I don't talk. I'm always quiet. North Platte is a small town, but proud of its history. It was once the world's largest railroad marshaling yard, and though now diminished in importance, it retains a distinctive character, a mixture of old-fashioned dignity and a desire for progress. My house on Oak Street was in the old part of town, near the park where Eleanor and I walked every Sunday. Parham and Valerie's house was in a newer neighborhood, among similarly pretentious mansions, built with money their owners didn't really have. Facades hiding mortgage bondage. I gotta go. Lindell finished his juice and stood up. I'll be late tonight. We have a chemistry Olympiad. Good luck, kid, I nod. Will you show me the assignments later? He smiles and gives my shoulder a quick squeeze. Our secret way of expressing affection without attracting the attention of Valerie, who doesn't approve of being overly sentimental toward me. After my grandson leaves, I slowly wash the dishes. I try not to leave any trace of my presence in the kitchen. That's how I've been living for the past 3 years, trying to be inconspicuous, not to disturb, not to interfere. If only they knew. If only they knew that former financial analyst Mortimer Hollis hadn't just saved for his old age, but had made a fortune by skillfully investing for 40 years. That the money from the sale of the Oak Street house was only a small part of what I owned. But even Perry didn't know that. Eleanor didn't think it was a good idea to spoil her son with money, and I agreed with her. We paid for his education, helped with the down payment on the house, but nothing more. The sound of footsteps on the stairs makes me hurry up. Valerie comes down in her silk robe, which I know for a fact costs more than the average American's monthly pension. Oh, Mortimer, you've already had breakfast. She fakes a smile that doesn't affect her eyes. I hope you haven't touched the organic honey. It's for the children's sandwiches. Good morning, Valerie, I reply. No, I only ate my oatmeal. Excellent. She opens the refrigerator and takes out the yogurt. By the way, I noticed that your toothbrush is taking up too much space on the shelf. Could you move it to a cup? This conversation is repeated with slight variations almost every morning. My toothbrush, my slippers, my plaid in the living room. All taking up too much space or lying in the wrong place. At first I tried to explain myself. Now I just nod. Of course, Valerie. I'll move it right away. Also, she takes a sip of coffee from her designer mug. Parham and I have something we want to discuss with you tonight. Family dinner is at 18:30, so try not to be late. Her tone doesn't suggest questions, so I just nod and walk out of the kitchen. Family dinner is always a bad sign. Usually after these dinners, I have to tighten my belt even tighter. Give up something else. Become even more invisible in this house. In my room, I sit in a chair by the window. From here, I can see the backyard with its immaculately mowed lawn and ornamental pond, what Valerie calls a water garden. Everything is perfect. Everything is just right. Everything is for show. Just like the life they're trying to lead, the life of a successful American family, hiding a pile of debt and mutual resentment behind a glossy facade. I pull Eleanor's picture out of the nightstand. I can't display portraits of her here in this house. Valerie thinks it compromises the integrity of the interior. My Ellie smiles at me from the picture, and I can almost hear her voice. Mort, why do you let them treat you like that? I don't know, Ellie. I don't know. Maybe it's because after she died, something in me snapped. It's like the linchpin that held me upright all these years suddenly disappeared. I've always been a quiet person, preferring to observe and analyze rather than act out. But with Eleanor by my side, I felt strong. Without her, all that remained was fatigue and unwillingness to fight. Or maybe I hoped that here, in this house, I could reconnect with the only son Ellie and I seemed to have lost years ago. He was such a cheerful boy, inquisitive and kind. And then he met Valerie, and gradually he became a shadow of that woman, a man with no opinion or will of his own. But perhaps that's Eleanor and I's fault. We were too soft parents, too protective of him, didn't teach him to stand up for himself. And now I'm paying for our mistakes, living under the same roof with a son who allows his wife to humiliate her own father. It's starting to rain outside the window. Drops pound on the glass, blurring the outline of the perfect garden. On days like this, I miss my old house especially. The creaky floorboards, the smell of books in the library, everything that was truly mine. But most of all, I miss the freedom to be myself. To be able to drink my tea, read my books, listen to my music without fear of a judgmental look or a barbed remark. I sigh and tuck the picture back into my nightstand. Well, we'll see what they want to discuss tonight. Something tells me this family dinner will be a turning point. And maybe it's time to finally remember who Mortimer Hollis really is. The family dinner turned out to be exactly what I imagined it would be. Another round of veiled grievances. Valerie served baked salmon, which I could barely taste. Years of living here had dulled even that simple pleasure. Mortimer, she began, elegantly blotting her lips with a napkin. We've calculated last month's expenses. I put down my fork slowly. Parham studied the contents of his glass, avoiding my gaze. Really, I answered, though I knew any answer was meaningless. It was not a question, but an introduction to a monologue. Yes, and you know what we noticed? Valerie paused for dramatic effect. Your share of the utility bill was $243.70. She pronounced the amount as if she were pronouncing a death sentence. I could have reminded her that I pay $500 a month in common expenses, but I knew that any excuse would be useless. That's a lot, I nodded. It's not about the amount, Parham interjected, still not looking at me. It's about the trend. Your expenses are going up. And that's despite the fact that your room is the smallest in the house, Valerie added. I made a chart of your expenses by square meter. You use a disproportionate amount of electricity. A cost per square meter chart. I could barely contain a smile. My son married a woman who makes these charts and calculates how much electricity his father uses. I'll try to use light more economically, I said. And water, Valerie added immediately. Your daily water routine also exceeds the norm. My water routine is showering once a day and brushing my teeth twice. But I just nodded. And then there's the matter of nutrition, she continued. Do you know how much organic food costs these days? And you're eating with us. I could buy groceries separately, I suggested. That would be even more convenient. At least I could eat something I really like once in a while. No, Valerie acted shocked. We're family. I just think it would be fair to increase your monthly share. With inflation and all. Parham finally looked at me. Dad, we just want to be honest. $1,000 a month would be a fairer amount. 1,000 instead of 500. Double the pay for the privilege of living in a closet-sized room and enduring daily humiliation. I could afford 5,000, but it wasn't about the money. I'll think about it, I replied. My pension isn't very big. But you have the money from the sale of the house, Valerie quickly interjected. Didn't you invest it as Parham advised? It should be a good income. I saw a greedy gleam in her eyes. She was always more interested in my finances than my health. Investments aren't as lucrative as I'd like them to be, I said evasively. But I'll consider your offer. After dinner, I helped clear the table, ignoring Valerie's remarks that I wasn't putting the plates in the dishwasher correctly. Then retired to my room as usual. But this evening, I didn't bother to get the book. Instead, I pulled out an old laptop from its hiding place behind the closet. Eleanor always said I was paranoid when I insisted on keeping important documents in encrypted folders. Who needs your old reports? She laughed. But years of working in finance had taught me caution, and now that habit came in handy. I checked the status of my investments. Everything was fine. Stocks were up, bonds were yielding a steady income. I did invest the money from the sale of the house, as Parham had advised, but not in the safe funds he had recommended, but in more aggressive instruments. The result exceeded my expectations. The amount almost doubled in 3 years. If Valerie had known this, she wouldn't have stopped at $1,000 a month. She would have found a way to siphon every last dime out of me. I heard muffled voices from the master bedroom just above my room. Parham and Valerie didn't know that. Because of the ventilation, their conversations sometimes reached me. I didn't usually eavesdrop, but today something made me listen. We can't go on like this. Parham's voice sounded tired and strained. The mortgage is eating up too much. Don't start talking about my job again, Valerie snapped at him. I'm not going back to that office. They underestimated me, so that's what this is about. Valerie quit her position as a legal consultant about a year ago, saying she wanted to focus on her family. I suspected it was a conflict with her superiors, but I didn't think it was that serious. That's not what I mean, Parham sighed. It's just that our expenses, your new SUV, the kitchen remodel, the country club membership. You want us to live like beggars? Valerie's voice became hysterical. I want the kids to be ashamed of their parents? I want us to be able to pay our bills without panicking every month, Param replied. I barely scraped together the last mortgage payment. I froze. They were hiding financial problems from me while simultaneously demanding an increase in my contribution. But worse, my son seemed to lack the resolve to stand up to his wife's spendthrift ways. Your father could help, Valerie said, her voice turning honeyed. He sold the house for $400,000. Where did that money go? How much can a lonely old man spend? He said he invested it. And what? Valerie interrupted. Those investments should be earning a return. Why is he holding out on the money? We shelter him, take care of him, and he won't even help his own son? Sheltered. They do. Those words hurt me. I don't live here out of charity. I was persuaded to sell the house on the promise of family warmth and the chance to be close to my grandchildren. What I got was a cold room and constant recriminations. Maybe his investments aren't very profitable, Param suggested uncertainly. Don't be naive, Valerie snorted. Your father was a financial analyst. He knows exactly how to invest money. He's a cheapskate. Always has been. I could almost physically feel my son not daring to object, to defend me. What do you suggest? He asked after a pause. We need to get to his money, Valerie said bluntly. He must either give us a decent sum or increase the monthly payments substantially. He won't agree to that, Param objected. You know how stubborn he is. Then we'll press him. Valerie's voice became hard. We'll make it so that he'll be willing to shell out the money. We'll start with the utilities. Then we'll move on to his personal belongings. I've been wanting to clear out his closet of his old stuff for a long time. My old junk is books, photo albums, and a few boxes of memorabilia I brought from my home. All that's left of my old life. I don't know, Val, Param began, but she cut him short. Or do you want to lose the house? The bank won't wait for you to get up the courage to talk to Daddy about money. There was silence. I pictured my son sitting with his head down, unable to resist his wife's pressure. What a weak man he had grown up to be. All right, Param said at last, but let's take it one step at a time. We'll start by increasing his share of the expenses. We already have, Valerie said smugly. $1,000 is just the beginning. By the end of the year, he'll be paying $2,000, or I'm not Valerie Hollis. And if he refuses, Param asked, then we'll hint that maybe he'd better find another place to live, Valerie replied stiffly. Let's see how he likes the idea of living in a nursing home on his modest pension. I turned off the laptop and tucked it back into its hiding place. Something inside me snapped completely. No, not my heart. I could still feel it beating in my chest. Rather, it was the last thread that tied me to the illusion of family warmth in this house. They didn't just dislike me. They saw me as a cash cow, a source of funding for their exorbitant appetites. They were ready to blackmail my father, threatening to put him out on the street if he didn't pay up. I went to the window and looked out at North Platte at night. Somewhere out there, 20 blocks away, stood my former house on Oak Street. The new owners had repainted it gray and replaced the porch, but it was still my home. The house where I'd been happy with Eleanor, where I'd raised my son, where I could be myself. I'd let them wipe their feet on me for too long. For too long, I've played the role of a frail old man living at the mercy of my caring relatives. It was time to put an end to it. The next morning, after waiting for everyone to leave, I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in almost 3 years. Baxter, it's Mortimer Hollis. Yeah, it's been a while. I need your help with a delicate matter. No, nothing illegal, I grinned. I just want to know some details about my son's mortgage. James Baxter had been a colleague of mine for many years. He now held a high position in the bank that, from the documents I happened to see, had given Param a mortgage loan. Nothing illegal I really wasn't planning. I just wanted to know what I was dealing with before taking any further steps. After talking to Baxter, the picture became even clearer. Param and Valerie had taken out a 20-year mortgage with a down payment that I had given them as a gift. They had refinanced the loan twice in 5 years, each time increasing the amount for emergency needs. They were now on the verge of default, with late payments and penalties. Later, I stopped by the office of my investment manager, Robert Crane. We discussed the possibilities of releasing some of the funds quickly without losing yield. Contrary to what Param and Valerie thought, my investments were diversified and easily convertible to cash. Are you planning a big purchase? Robert asked when we finished the paperwork. The return of freedom, I answered. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the corners of my lips lift into a real smile. On the way home, I stopped by Blue Moon, a little cafe in the old part of town where Eleanor and I used to frequent. To my surprise, it was still open, and even the same barista, Tony, was behind the counter. "Mr. Hollis," he exclaimed when he saw me. "It's been a long time. I wondered where you'd disappeared to." "Moved in with my son," I said, ordering my favorite double espresso. "But it looks like I'll be back to my native land soon." "We'll be happy to see you regularly again," Tony said sincerely. "Your table by the window is always free for you." I sat in the cafe, sipping a strong coffee and thinking about my plan. It was easier than I thought. Just stop being afraid of confrontation. Stop clinging to the illusion of family, and just act in my own interests. When I got home, Valerie greeted me with a disgruntled look on her face. "Mortimer, where have you been?" We were worried. "We" is an obvious exaggeration. Perrin probably hadn't even noticed my absence, and Valerie was only worried that I'd gone to withdraw money from my accounts. "Visiting an old friend," I answered. I didn't realize I had to report my movements. She pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything. Apparently, the make things unbearable plan didn't yet include outright house arrest. In the evening, Lindell peeked into my room, knocking softly. "Grandpa, are you okay?" he asked. "You seem somehow different today." "Shrewd boy. Always has been." "It's okay, kid," I replied. "I just made a big decision." "What's that?" He sat down on the edge of my bed. I looked at my grandson, the only person in this house who genuinely cared about me. "You'll find out soon enough," I said. "But don't worry, everything will be fine." Lindell nodded. At 17, he understood more than he showed. "Mom and Dad were talking about money again," he said quietly. "I heard them discussing increasing your share." "You don't have to worry about such things." I put my hand on his shoulder. "But I do worry," Lindell said stubbornly. "It's not fair the way they're treating you. Grandmother would never have allowed such a thing." At the mention of Eleanor, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. No, she really wouldn't have allowed it, and I shouldn't have either. "You know, your grandmother always said, 'Mort, never let others determine your worth.'" I smiled at the memory. Perhaps it was time to remember that wisdom. Lindell smiled back and hugged me tightly before retiring to his room. And I pulled out my secret notebook and started making a plan to regain my independence, my dignity, and control of my own life. It wasn't going to be easy. Valerie won't back down without a fight, and Perrin won't find the strength to stand up to her. But I have an advantage they don't realize. I know the truth about their financial situation, and I have the resources to turn the tide in my favor. I closed my laptop and went to bed, feeling unaccustomedly elated. For the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep not with a sense of bitterness and disappointment, but with anticipation of change that I was about to initiate myself. Over the next week, the tension in the house grew like the storm clouds before the storm. Valerie became even pickier. My slippers were now not to be in the hallway at all, my shampoo was taking up too much space in the bathroom, and my infrequent phone calls were interfering with everyone's concentration. I realized this was just part of her plan to make my life so unbearable that I offered to increase my financial support myself. Friday morning, on my way down to the kitchen, I heard Valerie instructing Perrin. "Tonight," she said in a quiet but insistent voice, "tonight you must have a serious talk with him. I've made a list of all our expenditures on him for the last 3 months." "Maybe you shouldn't push so hard," my son said uncertainly. "After all, he is my father." "That's exactly why you have to be firm," Valerie said. "He is your father, and he should help his only son. If my mother were alive and had any savings, I wouldn't hesitate to ask her for help." I stepped back, not wanting them to notice my presence. "Tonight, then." Well, I was ready. I had planned and prepared everything over the past few days. I spent the entire day in my room pretending to be engrossed in reading. In fact, I'd been going over the documents Baxter had sent me. Mortgage statements, prepayment terms, legal formalities. Everything was ready. All I had to do was sign a few papers, and I would own the house. At 17:30, Valerie knocked on my door. "Dinner in an hour," she said with a fake smile. "I made your favorite steak." My favorite steak. She didn't even know I preferred fish. Eleanor would never make that mistake. Thank you, Valerie. I'll be there, I replied, remaining calm. At exactly 18:30, I entered the dining room. The table was set with the utmost care china, crystal, silverware. Valerie was evidently preparing for an important conversation and had decided to create an appropriate atmosphere. Good evening, Mortimer. She pointed to my seat. Sit down. Everything is ready. The twins were already seated at the table. Paxton was fiddling with his phone, and Lindell gave me a concerned look. He sensed that something was brewing. Kids, Valerie clapped her hands together. Phones are put away. We're having a family dinner tonight. Family dinner always sounded like a declaration of hostilities when she said it. Parham showed up last, carrying a bottle of red wine. He looked tense, avoiding my gaze. Judging by his slightly reddened eyes, he'd already had a drink for courage. We spent the first half of dinner in awkward silence, punctuated only by the standard questions about school and work. Valerie asked the twins about their studies with exaggerated enthusiasm, while Parham concentrated on carving his steak like it was the most important thing in the world. Finally, when dessert was served, Valerie made a sign to Parham. He cleared his throat and straightened up. Dad, he began, trying to keep his voice steady. Valerie and I wanted to talk to you about the financial situation. What kind of situation? I asked calmly, sipping my tea. Parham hesitated, and Valerie immediately took the initiative. About your contribution to the family budget, Mortimer, she said, getting right to the point. As you know, it's not cheap to run a house. Utility bills, property taxes, insurance, not to mention groceries and other daily expenses. Of course, I nodded. I realize that maintaining a house like this requires a lot of money. So, Valerie pulled out a folder from under the table that I hadn't noticed before. I've made a detailed report of our expenses for the last 6 months, and your share, in a fair distribution, should not be $500 or $1,000, but at least $2,000. She said the amount with obvious pleasure, watching my reaction. $2,000, I repeated thoughtfully. That's considerably more than we discussed last time. The situation has changed, Parham interjected. Costs have gone up, and you've been living with us for 3 years now, and you've had all the comforts. I understand, I nodded again. You think I don't contribute enough to the family budget. Exactly. Valerie looked at her husband triumphantly as if to say, you see, he understands. Daddy, Parham had the courage to look me in the eye. We know you sold the house for $400,000. Even if you spent half of it, you should have enough left over to help us. Help with what? I asked, and there was silence in the room. With living, Parham said at last. Paying bills, paying the mortgage. You mean you're having financial difficulties? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. No, Valerie said quickly. We simply believe that your contribution should be proportional to your capabilities. You have savings that you, for some unknown reason, keep to yourself, while we, my son shouted, you're not contributing enough to the family. I suddenly interrupted her, looking directly at Parham. He flinched as if from a blow. I didn't yell. Not yet, I answered. But that's where it's going, isn't it? First the polite talk about fair distribution, then the demands for $2,000 a month, and then what? 3? 4? Or do you ask for all the money from the sale of the house? Valerie turned pale, and then her face was covered with red spots. You've got it all wrong, she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. No, Valerie, I'm getting it right. You and Parham are in debt because you want to live beyond your means, and now you're hoping to solve your problems at my expense. That's not true, she exclaimed. We just want justice. Justice? I allowed myself to chuckle for the first time in 3 years. Was it fair to convince me to sell the house, promising me family warmth and care, and then treat me like a freeloader? We never, Parham began, but his wife wouldn't let him finish. So, we gave you a room. We feed you. We put up with your senile habits. Her voice broke into a shriek. And what do we get in return? A measly $500 a month. What did you expect? I asked calmly. That I'd give you all my savings? Yes, Valerie blurted out, and then she bit her tongue. I mean, not all of it, of course, but a significant part of it. You're not going to take the money to your grave, are you? Mom! Lindell exclaimed, shocked by her words. Shut up, she said. Grown-ups talk. I slowly put the napkin on the table and looked at my son. Param, is this your position too? He looked cornered, his eyes darting between me and my wife. Dad, He took a deep breath. Yes, I believe you could help us more. After all, we're a family. A family, I repeated. That's an interesting concept. My family is Eleanor, who would never count how much electricity I use or how long it takes me to take a shower. Valerie jumped up from her seat, her patience breaking. Stop bringing up the past, she shouted. We're talking about the present, about real problems. Either you start making a decent contribution to this family or... Either what? I asked quietly. Or you're going to have to find another place to live, she finished, breathing heavily with anger. I will no longer tolerate your stinginess in my house. Valerie! Param tried to stop her, but it was too late. No, let him hear. She turned to me. Either you help more or get out of the house. There was a sepulchral silence in the room. Paxton was staring into his plate, Lindell at me with an expression of horror and sympathy. Param froze, not knowing what to do. I rose slowly. I understand, I said calmly. Thank you for dinner, and walked out of the room, leaving them in a daze. In my room, I quickly packed a few things into a small bag. Documents, medication, a picture of Eleanor. The rest could wait. Then quietly left the house through the back door. No one tried to stop me. The evening was cool but not cold. I walked down the familiar streets of North Platte, feeling strangely light. It was as if the heavy weight I'd been carrying for 3 years had suddenly disappeared. The route was familiar. I was headed to the Blue Moon Cafe, my old haunt. Tony, the barista, greeted me with a genuine smile. Mr. Hollis, long time no see. The usual, double espresso? Yes, please. I sank down at my favorite table by the window. The cafe was almost empty. Just a couple of students in the far corner and an old woman with a book at the bar. I sat there looking out at the evening North Platte and pondering my situation. 3 years ago, I had made the mistake of giving in to the entreaties of my son and daughter-in-law. I sold the house I loved, gave up my independence in hopes of finding family warmth, and what did I get in return? A cramped room, constant recriminations, and now an open ultimatum to pay up or get out. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a number. Baxter, it's Mortimer. I'm sorry to call you so late. Yeah, I still want to do it. In fact, I want to do it right now. Can you set up a meeting with the manager tomorrow morning? Great. I'll be there at 9. I then called a small hotel near the city center and booked a room for a few days. I needed somewhere to crash until I decided what to do next. As I finished my coffee, I got several messages on my phone from Lindell. Grandpa, where are you? Everyone's worried. And a little later, Dad says for you to come back, Mom didn't mean it. Didn't mean that. I grinned. That's exactly what Valerie meant. She just didn't expect me to actually leave. She thought I'd be scared of the threat of being homeless and agree to her demands. I replied to my grandson with a short message. I'm fine. Don't worry. I'm going to sleep in a hotel. We'll talk tomorrow. The next morning I was at the bank at 9 o'clock sharp. Baxter met me in his office. Chewy, Mort, good to see you. He shook my hand firmly. Though the circumstances are not pleasant, life is seldom pleasant in all its manifestations, I said philosophically. So, Baxter laid out the papers on the table. I've prepared everything as we discussed. Are you sure you want to do this? Absolutely, I nodded. Explain to me again how it's going to work. It's pretty simple, he pointed to the papers. You pay off your son's mortgage, paying the remaining balance in full. Since the loan is in his name, technically he becomes the owner of the house without encumbrances. But, Baxter raised his finger, at the same time, we'll execute a deed transferring ownership to you. Your son will have to sign it, but given that you're saving him from potential bankruptcy, I don't think he'll refuse. And if he does, I asked, then the bank gets the money, your son gets out of debt, but the house stays his. It's a risk, Baxter admitted frankly. But from what you've told me, and from the state of their accounts that I can see, they're desperate. They'll agree to any terms to avoid collapse. I twirled the pen in my hands thoughtfully. Param is my son, flesh of my flesh, but he has long since become a stranger, a man who allows his wife to blackmail her own father. All right, I made my decision. Let's proceed. The process took almost 2 hours. I had to fill out a lot of forms, sign dozens of pages, transfer money from account to account. But finally, everything was ready. Congratulations, Baxter said, handing me copies of the documents. You've just saved your son from financial ruin and may have bought a house. You still have a tough conversation to have, though. I know, I nodded, but now I'm going to speak from a position of strength, not a beggar. As I left the bank, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in 3 years, I was taking control of my situation, no longer a victim of circumstance and manipulation. I hailed a cab and gave the address of Param's house, now my house. On the way, I thought about what I would say to my son and his wife. I felt no gloating, no desire for revenge, only a tired determination to dot all the I's and regain control of my own life. The cab pulled up in front of a familiar 2-story mansion. I paid the driver and walked slowly to the front door. Param's car was parked in the driveway. It looked like he hadn't gone to work, alarmed by my disappearance. I pressed the bell and braced myself for the conversation to come. In the 3 years I'd lived in this house, I'd never rang the doorbell. Just walked in, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. But that's all changed now. Now I'm not a guest, not a freeloader, not a burden. Now I'm a host. The door opened and Param appeared on the threshold. His face was a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Papa," he exclaimed, "where have you been? We were worried." Worried? I almost chuckled at that word. Worried about their source of extra income, not me. I needed time to think, I answered calmly. "May I come in?" Param stepped back, letting me into the house that was now mine, though he didn't know it yet. "Valerie," he shouted, "Daddy's back." I walked into the living room and sat down in a chair. Not my usual spot in the corner, but the center chair that Param usually occupied. A small but symbolic gesture. Valerie walked down the stairs, fixing her hair as she went. She was clearly trying to look calm and collected, but I could see the traces of anxiety on her face. "Mortimer," she faked a smile. "We were so worried, leaving like that, without a word. It's dangerous at your age." "I'm 73, not 93, I said, "and I'm quite capable of taking care of myself." "Of course you are," she agreed quickly, exchanging glances with Param. "We were just worried. Where did you spend the night?" "At the hotel," I pulled out a file folder. I had an important case this morning." "A case?" Param frowned. "What kind of business?" I slowly opened the folder and laid the documents out on the coffee table. "I was at the bank," I said. "The same bank where you have your mortgage." Valerie's face changed instantly. The smile disappeared, her eyes narrowed. "Why?" she asked tensely. "I paid off your mortgage," I answered simply. "Completely." There was a deafening silence. Param and Valerie froze, trying to comprehend my words. "You? What?" Param finally squeezed out. "You paid off our mortgage? All of it?" "Yes," I nodded. "The bank debt no longer existed. The house is free of encumbrances." Valerie was the first to come to her senses. Her face suddenly brightened, and she rushed toward me with the express intention of hugging me. "Oh, Mortimer, I knew you wouldn't leave us in trouble. I've always told Param what a wonderful man you are." I raised my hand to stop her impulse. "But there is one condition," I said. "Not a condition, but a fact you must know." Valerie froze, her smile fading slightly. "What fact?" Param asked, swallowing involuntarily. "I own the house now." I pointed to the second stack of documents. "There's a deed of conveyance. It requires your signature, Param, but considering I've just saved you from imminent bankruptcy, I suppose that won't be a problem." Valerie's face turned as white as chalk. "What?" she almost screamed. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Not at all." I looked at her calmly. "I paid off the remaining $235,000 on your mortgage. The money has already been transferred. The bank has no further claim on this house." "But how could you?" Param looked shocked. "Where did you get that kind of money?" "Oh, that's an interesting question." I allowed myself a slight smile. Remember when you and Valerie were always wondering where I'd put the money from the sale of the house? I did invest it. It was a good one. And now you want to take our house? Valerie's voice was shaking with rage. After all we've done for you? What have you done for me, Valerie? I looked her straight in the eye. Forced me to sell the house I loved, put me in the servants' quarters, treated me for 3 years, counted every dollar I spent, every kilowatt of electricity I used. We took you in, she shouted. No, I shook my head. You manipulated me to gain access to my money. You counted on me to support you, to pay for your exorbitant expenses, your lifestyle beyond your means. Parham sank down on the couch, covering his face with his hands. Dad, it's not like that. It's not? I raised an eyebrow. Then why did you hide your financial problems from me? Why didn't Valerie tell me she quit her job a year ago? Why didn't you admit that you were struggling to keep up with your mortgage payments? How do you know? Parham raised a surprised look at me. I still have friends in the financial world, I replied. And unlike some people, they don't lie to me. There's only one person lying here. Valerie was almost shaking with anger. You've been pretending to be a poor pensioner all this time, while you've been hiding millions. Not millions, I corrected, but enough to live comfortably and not depend on the favors of people like you. And I wasn't pretending. I just didn't publicize my financial situation. As it turns out, not for nothing. Parham suddenly straightened up. Wait, so this was all planned? You waited until we were on the verge of bankruptcy to take our house? I looked at my son with surprise. No, Parham. I had hoped that I would never have to resort to such measures. I had hoped that you had truly invited me to live with you out of love and concern, not out of self-interest. But yesterday's ultimatum put things into perspective. It wasn't an ultimatum, Valerie said quickly, changing tactics. I just overreacted. You know how explosive I am. I do, I nodded. And I know that behind that explosive temper is a calculating mind. It was no accident that you made that scene last night. You were planning to pressure me into paying up. Valerie opened her mouth to object, but couldn't find the words. So now what? Parham asked quietly. Are you going to kick us out of the house? Leave us homeless? What were you going to do to me? I parried. Either you help more or get out of the house. Those were your words, Valerie. That's not what I meant, she exclaimed. No, that's exactly what you meant, I was adamant. You thought I was weak and dependent on you. You thought I would be afraid of the prospect of being on the street and agree to your terms. But I'm not weak or dependent. Valerie suddenly burst into tears, a theatrical device she probably thought would work. You can't do this to us, she sobbed. We have children. Where are we going to live? I haven't decided yet, I answered honestly. But don't worry, I won't put you out on the street right now. We'll have time to discuss what we're going to do. Parham looked at me with a new expression, a mixture of fear, respect, and shame. Shame? Dad, I didn't know you were still so determined. I didn't know it myself, I admitted. For 3 years, I let you treat me like a burden. 3 years of humiliation and neglect. Do you know why? Why? Parham asked quietly. Because I hoped that somewhere deep inside, you were still my son, the son Eleanor and I had raised, the boy who loved his parents and valued family ties. I hoped that one day you'd show some character and stop this farce. Farce? Parham frowned. Yes, a farce called, We Take Care of the Old Man. I sighed. But you never had the courage to stand up to your wife, even when she was humiliating your father. Don't you dare accuse my husband. Valerie jumped up. And you don't tell me what to do in my house, I said harshly. There was a heavy silence in the living room. Parham looked lost and Valerie continued to sob quietly, though I could see that her mind was working feverishly, trying to find a way out of the situation. You know, I broke the silence, when you convinced me to sell the house and move in with you, you promised care and comfort. You said I'd be better off surrounded by my family than alone in a big empty house. I believed you. I thought that even if I missed my old home, at least I would be closer to my grandchildren, to you, Parham. I pulled a picture of Eleanor from my inside pocket. Your mother always said you were like her, soft, pliant, inclined to see the best in people. She considered it a virtue. But there's a difference between kindness and weakness, between being accommodating and having no opinion of your own. Param looked at the photograph in silence. For years, I've watched you let Valerie make all the decisions, how you go along with her ambitions and desires, even when they lead you to financial ruin. And all this time, I kept quiet because I didn't want to interfere in your life. But when this woman started threatening to kick me out of the house, demanding money, I realized that silence was no longer an option. It's clear to me now, Valerie said suddenly, wiping away her tears. You hate me. You always have. No, Valerie, I shook my head. I have no hatred for you, only disappointment. I'm disappointed that the woman my son chose has turned out to be so petty and greedy. How dare you? She jumped to her feet. I built this house. I raised your grandchildren. Yeah? You created an illusion, I interrupted her. The illusion of a successful family living in a beautiful home. But that illusion is built on the sand of debt and lies. You didn't earn that house. You took out a loan on it that you couldn't pay back. You didn't create comfort. You created a showcase for neighbors and acquaintances. Param held up his hand, stopping his wife from launching into another tirade. Papa, he said quietly, I understand your resentment. I really did you wrong. But is there really no other way? Do you really want to take the house away from us? I'm not taking it away, I countered. I saved you from bankruptcy. Without my intervention, the bank would have started foreclosure proceedings in a few months. You would have lost the house anyway, only with a ruined credit history. So now what? Valerie crossed her arms over her chest. You're going to be our landlord? You're going to collect rent from us? That's one option, I agreed. But there are others. We can discuss them when you both calm down and realize the reality of the situation. At that moment, the front door opened, and the voices of the twins returning from school could be heard in the hall. Grandpa, Lindell appeared in the doorway of the living room. You're back! He rushed over to me, hugging me with a genuine joy I had so rarely seen in this house. Yes, baby, I hugged him back. I came back. Paxton remained standing in the doorway, uncertainly shifting his gaze from me to his parents. What's going on? He asked. Why are you all so weird? It's nothing, Valerie said quickly, trying to pull herself together. Just a little family discussion. Go to your rooms, kids. We need to finish talking. No, I stopped them. They're part of this family too, and they have a right to know what's going on. What are you going to tell them? Valerie sounded afraid. The truth, I answered simply. That I paid off your mortgage and now I own the house. What? Paxton looked shocked. How is that possible? It's a long story, I said. But to summarize, your parents were on the verge of bankruptcy because of their exorbitant spending and their inability to live within their means. I stepped in to save the day. Bankruptcy? Linda looked at his father. Dad, is it true? Param lowered his gaze, unable to answer. Your grandfather is exaggerating, Valerie intervened. We had temporary financial difficulties, but we could manage on our own. No, we couldn't, I was adamant. You were 3 steps away from losing your home. Delinquent payments, penalties, mounting interest. The bank was already preparing foreclosure papers. Paxton looked shocked, and Lindell didn't seem particularly surprised. I knew something was wrong, he said quietly. You were always fighting at night. What's going to happen now? Paxton asked, suddenly becoming very much like his father. Are you going to throw us out of the house, grandfather? I haven't decided yet, I repeated. But you must all realize that the situation has changed. This is my house, and I will decide who can live in it and under what conditions. That's blackmail, Valerie hissed. You're no better than us. No, Valerie, I shook my head. It's not blackmail. It's the consequences of your own actions. You've been living beyond your means for years, hiding the truth from your family, manipulating me, trying to squeeze money out of me. And when I didn't fall for your tricks, you threatened to throw me out on the street. Now you're reaping the consequences of your decisions. I never thought, Param started and then stopped talking. What, son? I looked at him. That I was capable of such an act. That I had the resolve to stand up to you. That I am not the helpless old man you thought I was? Param nodded silently. A lot of things change when a man is backed into a corner, I said. I've put up with your attitude for 3 years. I've put up with it for the phantom hope of family warmth, for the chance to be close to my grandchildren. But there's a limit to everything, and yesterday you crossed that limit. I got up, feeling suddenly tired of this conversation. I'm going back to my room. I need to rest and think about what to do next. And you, I looked at Param and Valerie, I suggest you do the same. Think about how we're going to live our lives. Because whether you like it or not, we're going to have to find some kind of solution. I headed for the door, but stopped, turning to look at my family who were frozen in a daze. And yes, Param, the deeds are on the table. Sign them by tomorrow. Otherwise, I'll have to go to the lawyers, and that will create more complications for all of us. I left the living room, leaving them to digest their new reality. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's home, but like a master of the situation, master of my destiny and my life. The next 2 days passed in oppressive silence. Param avoided me, going to work earlier than usual and returning late at night. Valerie locked herself in her room, coming out only to prepare food for the children, defiantly ignoring my presence. The deed transfer papers, signed by Param, appeared silently on my desk. Obviously, he realized he had no choice. The twins reacted differently. Paxton was distant, clearly in solidarity with his parents, while Lindell glanced over at me often, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. "Grandfather," he asked on the evening of the second day, sitting on the edge of my bed, "what are you going to do with the house?" I put the book aside and looked at my grandson carefully. "Are you worried I'm going to kick you out?" He shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know. Maybe. Though I'd understand if you did that after everything Mom said." "Lindell, I'll never leave you homeless," I assured him. "But some things are going to change. It's inevitable." "Like what?" I sighed. It was time to tell him about my decision at least. "I'm not staying here, kid. I'm moving back to my old neighborhood." "But your house is sold?" Lindell frowned. "That's right. But my old friend Harold Finch's house recently became vacant. His daughter lives in Europe and decided to sell the property. I've already made an offer, which she's accepted." Lindell's eyes widened. "You bought a new house?" "When?" "Yesterday," I smiled. "The deal will be closed in a week. The house is only 3 blocks from my old house on Oak Street. It's smaller, but it's more than enough for one me." "So you'll be gone," I heard sadness in my grandson's voice. "What about us?" "That's up to your parents." I put my hand on his shoulder. "I plan to talk to them tonight and offer options." "What options?" Linda was clearly worried. "They could continue to live here, but as tenants. Or I could sell the house, and then they'd have to find a new place to live." "Which would you prefer?" his grandson asked shrewdly. I wondered. "Honestly, I'd rather they choose to rent. It would give them stability and time to get their finances in order. Plus," I winked at him, "I'll be able to see you more often." Lindell smiled and suddenly hugged me tightly. "I'll miss you when you're gone, Grandpa." "I'll only be 20 minutes away," I assured him. "You'll be able to come to me whenever you want. You'll have your own room." "Really?" he cheered up. "Sure. Harold's house is a 3-room house. 1 bedroom will be mine. The 2nd bedroom will be a guest room for you, and I plan to turn the 3rd bedroom into a library." "That sounds great," Lindell said sincerely. "Is it quiet?" "Very. The house is on a cul-de-sac. The neighbors are few and far between, and they're all elderly people who appreciate peace." Lindell was silent for a moment, then asked, "Have you ever thought of, I could live with you, at least once in a while?" That question caught me off guard. "What about your parents? School?" "It's even closer to school," he said quickly. "And my parents." He hesitated. "After everything that's happened, it's been unbearable at home. My mom's always nervous. My dad walks around like he's in the water. They fight every night." "I'm sorry to hear that," I sighed. "But I don't think Valerie would let you live with me." "I'm 18 soon," Lindell said stubbornly. "In 4 months, I'll decide where I want to live." I looked at my grandson carefully. He had really grown up in the last few years. No longer a child, but a young man with his own opinions and character. "Well, if that's what you really want, and if your parents don't mind, I'll be glad to have you in my house," I said at last. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The matter of this house has to be settled first." At 8 o'clock in the evening, I heard the front door open, and Param came home from work. It was time to have that conversation I'd been putting off for the last 2 days. I went down to the living room and found Param, Valerie, and the twins there. It looked like they were getting ready for a serious conversation too. "Good evening," I said, entering the room. Valerie pressed her lips together, but said nothing. Param nodded, avoiding my eyes. "We need to discuss how we're going to get on with our lives," I began without preamble. "I have some news and suggestions." "We're listening," Param replied dryly. "First, I've bought a house in the old part of town, and I'm moving there in a week." Valerie visibly tensed. Apparently, she feared that my next statement would be a demand to vacate the house. "As for you," I looked at my son and his wife, "you have two options. One, you can continue to live here, but as tenants. I'll set a reasonable rent, below market rate. This will give you stability and a chance to gradually get your finances in order." "Tenants?" Valerie clenched her fists. "In your own home?" "My house," I corrected gently. "The paperwork's already done, and legally I'm the sole owner of the property." "And the second option?" Param asked, putting his hand on his wife's shoulder, as if to keep her from having another outburst. "The second option is that I sell the house and you look for a new place to live according to your financial means." "You can't do that!" Valerie jumped to her feet. "This is our house. We've put so much hard work and love into it." "And debts," I added. "Debts that you couldn't pay and that I've relieved you of." "We didn't ask you to do that," she exclaimed. "Indeed you didn't," I agreed. "You were just trying to blackmail me by demanding money and threatening to put me out on the street." I only turned the situation around. Param looked distressed. "What's the rent?" he asked after a pause. $1,500 a month, I replied. "That's about half the market rent for a house like this in this neighborhood." "Half?" Valerie looked at me incredulously. "Why so little?" "Because no matter what, you're still my family," I answered simply. "And I don't want my grandchildren to be homeless or forced to move to a less comfortable neighborhood. And if we don't agree," Valerie crossed her arms over her chest, "then I'll put the house on the market," I shrugged. "At market value, it would fetch about $550,000. You'll have to find a new place on your own." "You're bluffing," Valerie said. "You're not throwing your own grandchildren out on the street." "I'm giving you a choice, Valerie," I explained patiently, "and enough time to make a decision. If you give up your lease, you'll have at least a month to find a new place to live. No one will be on the street." "Dad," Param intervened, "are you really serious about selling the house if we refuse to pay the rent?" "Yes," I answered firmly. "I've let myself be manipulated by you for too long. That's over. I will now act according to my interests, as you have always acted according to yours." "But $1,500, Param began. "That's considerably less than your monthly mortgage payment, which was $2,800, I reminded him. "Plus, you no longer have to worry about property taxes and home insurance, which I take care of as the owner. In fact, your monthly housing costs will be cut almost in half." Param and Valerie looked at each other. It was obvious that they hadn't expected such an offer. "Do we have time to think about it?" Param finally asked. "Sure," I nodded. "Let's say until the end of the week. But keep in mind that if you refuse, I'll start the process of selling the house immediately." "What about Lindell and Paxton?" Valerie asked, glancing at her sons, who were silently watching the conversation. "They're only a year away from graduation." "I already said I wouldn't leave my grandchildren without a roof over their heads," I reminded her. "If you agree to the lease, they'll stay here with you. If not, you'll have time to find suitable housing in the same school district." "And if we can't find anything suitable?" Valerie kept pushing. "Then you may have to rethink what's appropriate," I said firmly. "Many families live in much more modest conditions than you're used to." "How can you say that?" Valerie was indignant. "Do you want your grandchildren to live in a shithole?" "No, I want my grandchildren to live in a house their parents can afford without having to defraud banks and blackmail relatives," I parried. "And speaking of grandchildren, Lindell has expressed a desire to stay with me at my new home on occasion. I have nothing against it." "What?" Valerie turned sharply to Lindell. "Did you discuss it with your grandfather behind our backs?" "Yes, I did," Lindell replied calmly. "And I'd really like to stay with him sometimes. It's quiet, peaceful, and even closer to school than from here." "Unbelievable," Valerie splashed her hands. "Now you're turning even the children against us." "I didn't turn anyone against us," I countered. Lindell came to me with the offer. "Because you brainwashed him." Valerie was furious. "First you take our house, Then you try to take our son. Mom, stop it, Lindell said suddenly firmly. Grandpa didn't brainwash me. I saw and heard it all myself. The way you treated him all those years. The way you made him sell the house, and then you treated him like he was a burden. I saw it all, and I was ashamed of you. Lindell, Valerie exclaimed. How dare you speak to your mother like that? And how dare you speak to grandfather like that? He parried. Either you help more or get out of the house. Wasn't that what you said to him at that dinner? Valerie turned pale. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand everything, Lindell was adamant. You and your father live beyond your means. You're always in debt. And when things got tight, you decided to squeeze money out of your grandfather. And when he wouldn't budge, you threatened to throw him out on the street. And now that he's turned the situation around, you resent him for doing you an injustice. That's enough, Parham pounded his fist on the table. Lindell, you're forgetting yourself. We are your parents and you must respect us. Respect must be earned, Lindell said quietly, and your behavior makes me question whether you deserve it. Get out, Valerie shouted, pointing at the door. To your room, now. Lindell calmly stood up. With pleasure, he said. The hypocrisy in this room had become unbreathable. He headed for the exit, but stopped beside me and put his hand on my shoulder. I support you, Grandpa, he said loudly for all to hear. And I do want to live with you sometimes if you'll let me. With those words, he left the room, leaving Valerie gasping with anger. You see what you've done, she lashed out at me. Turned my son against us. No, Valerie, I shook my head. You've turned him against you with your behavior. Lindell had always been an observant and fair-minded boy. He simply drew his conclusions from what he saw. Paxton, who had been silent all this time, stood up abruptly. I think I'll go too, he said, avoiding looking at his parents. I have to study for a test tomorrow. He walked out without another word. I noticed that even Paxton, who was usually fully supportive of his mother, chose not to intervene in the conflict. Valerie collapsed on the couch and covered her face with her hands. Parham hesitantly approached her, but she pushed his hand away. It's all because of you, she gritted her teeth. You could never stand up to your father. Even now, when he's taking everything from us, you just stand there and watch. What am I supposed to do? Parham asked tiredly. The house belongs to him now. That's a legal fact. We can sue, but on what grounds? He was acting within the law. We really couldn't pay the mortgage, and he did save us from bankruptcy. You're a pathetic, weak man, Valerie spat out. A real man would have protected his family. From what? Parham grinned bitterly. From his own father, who offers us half the market rent? Who saved us from eviction and disgrace? Or are you suggesting I take a bat and drive him out by force? Then we'd be on the street for sure, but with a criminal record to boot. I watched in silence as they argued. What had been building up between them for years was finally coming out. My situation was just the catalyst for a conflict that had been brewing for a long time. I'll leave you to it, I said, rising. You obviously have a lot to talk about in private. My offer still stands for the rest of the week, $1,500 a month, and you can continue to live here. Or I sell the house and you look for a new place to live. I headed for the exit, but turned around at the door. One more thing, Valerie. If Lindell wants to stay with me sometimes, I won't prevent it. He's about to turn 18, and he's entitled to decide where and with whom he wants to spend his time. Is that a threat? She hissed. No, I shook my head. It's a fact. Your son has grown up. He's no longer a puppet to be manipulated. Neither am I. With those words, I left the living room, leaving them alone with their anger, their fear, and their need to make a difficult decision. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Valerie's muffled sobs and Parham's quiet, tired voice trying to comfort her. I stopped at the door of Lindell's room and knocked softly. Come in, came his voice. I opened the door and saw my grandson sitting on the bed with a book in his hands. Are you all right? I asked. Yes, he nodded. And you? Yeah, I smiled. Thanks for supporting me down there. I probably shouldn't have spoken so harshly to my parents, though. They deserved it, he said stubbornly. Especially Mom. She was always treating you like that, and I kept quiet. I'm ashamed of that. You have nothing to be ashamed of. I sat down next to him. You've always treated me with kindness and respect, and I appreciate it. Lyndall put the book down and looked me in the eye. Will you really let me stay with you sometimes? Of course, I nodded. You'll always be welcome in my house. But let's not complicate things right now. Give your parents time to calm down and make a decision about this house. Lyndall nodded, then suddenly asked, what about Paxton? Are you going to invite him too, I wondered. Paxton had always kept a low profile, clearly preferring not to get involved in family matters. Of course, I said at last. He's as much my grandson as you are, and he'll always be welcome. I'm just not sure he'll want to accept my invitation. I'll talk to him, Lyndall said. He's not as bad as he seems. He's a lot like Dad, always trying not to upset anyone, especially Mom. I know, I smiled. I don't hold it against him, and I'd be happy to have him in my house if he wants to come over. I stood up, feeling suddenly tired. It had been an emotionally intense day. Get some rest, I said to my grandson, and I have to go to my room. Tomorrow I have a lot to do. I have to get ready for the move. I'll help you pack, Lyndall offered. I don't have classes in the afternoon. Thanks, kid, I nodded gratefully. I'll be glad to have your help. As I left my grandson's room, I felt strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I felt neither fear nor uncertainty. I knew I had made the right decision, and I was ready to move on, to a new chapter of my life, in my own home, on my own terms. Moving into Harold Finch's house took less time than I expected. I don't have a lot of stuff. In the 3 years I've lived in Parham and Valerie's house, I've become accustomed to minimizing my presence. All my possessions fit into 4 boxes and 2 suitcases. Lyndall helped me pack, and Paxton, to my surprise, offered to help with the transportation. I know how to drive a truck, he said, speaking directly to me for the first time in a long time. We have a commercial driving class at school. It was a small olive branch of peace, and I accepted it gratefully. Parham and Valerie, after 2 days of intense discussions, agreed to my lease terms. They had no choice, though. Even with the reduced rent of $1,500, they were barely making ends meet. We accept your offer, Parham said, handing me the signed lease I'd drawn up with the help of a lawyer. But I want you to know that we don't think it's fair. Life is rarely fair, son, I said without gloating, simply stating a fact. And sometimes we have to accept the consequences of our decisions, however bitter they may be. Valerie wasn't present for this conversation. She still couldn't bring herself to talk to me directly after Lyndall had sided with me. On moving day, which was a sunny Thursday in mid-October, Paxton pulled a small rental truck up to the house. "Grandpa, everything's ready," he said as he entered my room, where Lyndall and I were finishing packing the last of our belongings. I nodded and looked around. The small room that had been my haven for the past 3 years now looked empty and impersonal, like a motel room after a guest had left. There was nothing to remind me that a man had lived here with his memories, his hopes, his fears. "Thank you, Paxton," I smiled warmly at my grandson. "I appreciate your help." He shrugged awkwardly. "It's the least I can do." In his eyes, I saw a mixture of emotions, embarrassment, regret, and perhaps a shadow of guilt. Over the years, unlike Lyndall, he'd kept his distance, preferring not to get involved in the complicated relationship between me and his parents. But now something was different. We loaded our things into the truck and headed for my new home. Parham came out to see me off, but limited himself to a discreet handshake. Valerie didn't show up. She stayed in her room, defiantly ignoring my departure. Harold Finch's house, now my house, was on a quiet street in the old part of North Platte. 2 stories high, with a small but well-kept garden, it reminded me of my old house on Oak Street, though it was considerably smaller. When we pulled up, I was surprised to find an elderly woman on the porch with a basket in her hands. "Mort!" she exclaimed when she saw me. "I knew it was you who had bought Harold's house." Edna Clark, widow of my old colleague Richard Clark, lived across the street. Eleanor and I had often dined with the Clarks in the old days. "Edna," I smiled as I approached her. "How did you know?" "At our age, not much is a secret," she grinned. "The real estate agent is Beverly Harris's niece, and Beverly plays bridge with me every Tuesday. I brought you a pie. Blueberry, just the way you like it." I was touched. In 3 years of living in my son's house, no one had ever mentioned what kind of pie I liked. "Thank you, Edna." I accepted the basket. "I'd like you to meet my grandsons, Lyndall and Paxton." What beautiful boys, Edna smiled. They look just like Eleanor, especially this one. She nodded at Lindell. Yeah, that's what they all say. I put my hand on my grandson's shoulder. The boys are helping me with the move. That's great, Edna glowed. When you're done, I'll invite you all to tea. I live in that blue house over there. She pointed across the street. And Mort, don't disappear for 3 years again. Our poker group has missed you. With those words, she departed, leaving me with the warm feeling of coming home. Not to a physical home that was sold 3 years ago, but to a place where you are known, remembered, and accepted for who you are. We unloaded our stuff and began to settle in. The house was clean and well kept. Harold, like me, was a neat man. The furniture, left over from the previous owner, was simple but good. I decided to keep most of it, only replacing some of it with something more comfortable. It's nice here, Lindell said, looking around the room I'd given him. It was spacious with a large window overlooking the garden, and it was really a good place to relax and study. Much cozier than at home. I'm glad you like it, I said. You can decorate it to your liking. It's your space. Paxton, who had been exploring the house, joined us. What's this room going to be? He asked, pointing to the third bedroom, still empty except for the bookshelves along the walls. A library, I answered. Or a study. I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll combine the two. Cool, Paxton said sincerely. You have that many books? A lot more, I smiled. Most of them have been in storage for 3 years. They should be here tomorrow. We spent the day setting up the house, and in the evening, as Edna had promised, we went to her house for tea. It turned out she had gathered a small group of neighbors, old acquaintances I hadn't seen since I moved in with my son. Mort, you old fox. Henry Weber, a former school teacher, shook my hand. We thought you'd forgotten all about us. I'm sorry, Henry, I said, embarrassed. I didn't get out to the old neighborhood much. Well, the important thing is that you're back, said Susan Parker, the widow of the dentist who had treated our family. Now our bridge company is back in full force. Paxton and Lindell were a little shy at first among the older people, but they soon got the hang of it, especially Lindell, who was chatting enthusiastically with Henry about the history of North Platte, while Paxton helped Edna serve tea. Returning home, I could call it home now, I felt a strange peacefulness. It was as if the long, grueling journey had finally come to an end, and I was back where I was always meant to be. The following week, life began to take a new direction. I took my things out of storage, arranged my books, hung pictures, including the portrait of Eleanor that now took pride of place in the living room. Lindell came almost every day after school, sometimes staying overnight. Paxton visited less often, but still dropped in a few times. Just for fun, as he said. Parham sent the first rent payment just in time, with a short cover letter, dry and businesslike. No personal touch, no attempt to build a relationship. I hadn't expected otherwise. The wound was too fresh, and his pride too wounded. Valerie showed no sign of wanting to communicate at all. The first time Lindell had said he'd stay the night, she'd thrown a tantrum. But she'd given in quickly when my son had reminded her that he was almost 18 and would soon be able to live wherever he wanted. She's afraid I'll tell you more about their financial problems, Lindell explained. There's not much to tell, though. They're barely making ends meet, even with the reduced rent. How's your father? I asked. He seemed depressed the day I left. He's the same as always, Lindell shrugged. Works, keeps quiet, pretends everything's okay. But he and Mom barely talk. I mean, she talks and he nods, but it's not a conversation. I sighed. No matter what, Parham was still my son, and it hurt me to see him like this. But I also realized that I couldn't and shouldn't interfere. He and Valerie had created this situation themselves, and it was up to them to find a way out. About a month after I moved in, Parham showed up unexpectedly on my doorstep. Unannounced, alone, with a look of determination on his face that I hadn't seen in years. Dad, we need to talk, he said when I opened the door. I led him into the house in silence. We walked to the living room and I offered him tea, which he declined. I've come to apologize, Parham began, locking his hands together. For everything. For the way we've treated you over the years. For letting Valerie manipulate you. For not having the courage to stop it in time. I looked at my son carefully. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also something else. Calculation? What has changed, Parham? I asked bluntly. Why apologize now? He lowered his gaze. Valerie and I are getting a divorce, he said quietly. I filed for divorce yesterday. It was unexpected, though perhaps logical after everything that had happened. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. Don't be, he shook his head. Our marriage had long ago become a farce. I was just too weak to admit it. But after your thing with the house, after you showed me that you could stand up for yourself, even at your age, he stopped talking. Anyway, I've been rethinking a lot of things. And now what? I asked. I don't know, he said honestly. Valerie will get the house as a result of the divorce, that is, the lease. We'll agree to joint custody of the twins, although they're almost of age and can decide who they want to live with. I'll rent an apartment somewhere nearby. He was silent for a moment, then added, I was hoping maybe we could start over. You and me, without Valerie between us. I felt conflicting emotions struggling inside me. On the one hand, this man is my son, my flesh and blood. On the other, the one who for years had allowed me to be humiliated, manipulated, treated like a burden. Param, I finally said, I appreciate your apology. I really do. And I'm glad you found the strength to change your life. But I can't just forget everything that happened and pretend the last 3 years never happened. His face stretched out. You won't forgive me? It's not about forgiveness. I shook my head. I forgive you, but trust is a different matter. It can't be rebuilt in one conversation, one apology. It takes time. It takes action. It takes proof. I understand, he said quietly. Let's do this, I suggested after a pause. We'll take our time. We'll start small. Maybe we'll have lunch together once in a while. Talk on the phone. See where it goes, but without expectations or pressure. Param nodded, something like relief flickering in his eyes. Perhaps he was afraid of total rejection. Thank you, Papa. That's fair. After he left, I sat in the living room for a long time, looking at Eleanor's portrait. What would she say about the situation? She'd probably advise me to give my son a chance, but to be careful. Eleanor had always been wiser than me in dealing with people. The next few months were spent establishing a new rhythm of life. I became involved in the social life of the neighborhood, playing bridge with Edna and her friends, attending weekly book club meetings at the local library, while occasionally attending lectures at the community college. My world, which had shrunk to the size of a room in my son's house, expanded again. Lyndall now spent almost as much time at my place as he did at his parents'. We talked often about his future plans. He wanted to study history and archaeology, and I supported his choice. Paxton stopped by too, though less often, usually on the pretext of helping with machinery or the garden. But I could see that he just liked the atmosphere in my house, relaxed, without the constant tension of his parents' house. Param kept his promise. He called every week, sometimes stopping by for lunch. Our conversations were cautious, avoiding difficult topics, but gradually we found common ground. He really changed after the divorce. He became more confident, learned to defend his opinion, even began to take interest in my financial advice. Not that I fully trusted these changes, but I was willing to give him a chance to prove their sincerity. Valerie predictably maintained an icy silence. She paid her rent exactly on time, probably afraid I'd kick her out of the house the first time she violated the terms, but avoided any contact. When I needed to discuss something concerning the house, I did it through Param or the children. We celebrated Christmas that year at my house, me, the twins, and Param. It was the first holiday in years when I didn't feel like an extra appendage to someone else's family, but like the master, the center of my own little world. Valerie didn't come, of course, but I didn't expect her to. In the evening, after Param had left and the twins were playing a board game in the living room, I went out on the back porch for some fresh air. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly in the dark sky. I looked up at them and thought about how amazing life had turned out. 3 years ago, I had sold the house I had lived in most of my life and moved in with my son, hoping to find some family warmth in my declining years. Instead, I received 3 years of humiliation and neglect. And now, after a dramatic turn of events, I had regained my home, my independence, and even developed a better relationship with my grandchildren than ever before. I felt no gloating or vindictive satisfaction that Valerie was now living in a house that belonged to me, on my terms. but I felt a quiet confidence in the rightness of my decision. Sometimes you have to stand up for your dignity, even if it hurts the people closest to you. Sometimes you need to draw clear boundaries to protect yourself from toxic relationships. Grandpa? Lindell's voice brought me out of my reverie. Aren't you freezing out here? No, baby, I smiled. I'm just looking at the stars. He stood beside me, and we stared at the sky for a few minutes in silence. You know, he said finally, I'm glad it worked out this way. Not that I'm happy about my parents' divorce, of course, but the fact that you live here now, that you have your own house, that we can spend time with you. I'm glad too, I put my hand on his shoulder. Sometimes we need to lose something to gain something more valuable. We went back to the house where it was warm and cozy. Eleanor's portrait hung on the wall, as if she too had been part of our celebration. The wood crackled in the fireplace, creating an atmosphere of home. I looked around my new home, small but full of life and memories. A home where I was a host, not an unwanted guest. A home where I could be myself without fear of judgment or ridicule. At 73, I began a new chapter of my life, and it promised to be much more dignified and happy than the previous one.